Let's talk about object-oriented programming now. So we're almost done with the topics that we have to cover for this course. There's one more topic that I'm just going to briefly discuss, and that's just about NumPy and Matplotlib. We're just going to have one class on that. So, but the major topics are done after this. So object-oriented programming is basically about creating objects. So this is object-oriented programming is popular because in it you're basically being more realistic. So for example, it's more applied towards businesses, right? So let's say you want to create a class. So let's say you're hired in a car showroom, and then they ask you to write a program that is basically gonna incorporate the data that they have for the cars, the different types of cars. So car is a class in that sense, that you have to create a classes of cars, which you basically enter the information for each car, and that basically creates an instance for that car. And so you're basically unifying data and procedures, right? So this is what is called encapsulation, where you write a code and then that code basically creates your data as well. And there are other examples like for example, in a particular aisle in a supermarket, there is always like a particular class of objects, right? So objects that are similar in nature, you always put them together, right? Even though they're different flavors sometimes of chips, for example, that's a class, and so on. So there are a lot of examples, and these things will make more sense when we look at examples. So a class is basically a combination of it specifies data and then methods. It's a combination of both, as I said. And a good example of this, examples make definitions more clear. So a good example of this is that it's like a blueprint, right? You're basically creating a blueprint, and then out of that blueprint, you're going to create multiple objects, and those objects are called instances. So that's a technical word that we're going to use. And a specific house that you create out of that blueprint is going to be called an instance or an object. And the function is called a method also. So if a function is a part of a class, it's called a method. So in Python, the things that we've been using, the built-in functions that we've been using are mostly classes. For example, list.sort that we have used. We use the list name over here and then sort. So that sort is basically like a method within that class. You can use the word function for that or a method, but if it's within a class, it's usually referred to as a method. So again, here's the big picture. We're going to create a class. So a class is again like a blueprint, and then these are objects that you create from the class, objects or instances that you create from the class, and you basically are creating like the data, data set from the class that you have created. So in Python, the syntax is class is the built-in function that we're going to use, and then the name of the class, you can call this anything, and then there are indented list of methods, and then we're going to use the self parameter. Self parameter is required for every method in the class, and we'll see what that means. So when you create an object, this is how you create an object. The object name, right? Again, like that house that you're creating from a blueprint. Then the class name, and then the arguments, like for example, the number of rooms in the house, and the basement, whether there's a basement or not, whatever. So any attributes for that particular class will go over here, and then you can create multiple houses, and then those would be like a data set in that's created from your class. Another so if you, let's say, use the import to import your module, right? So your module would come over here, and then the class would be part of that module, as we'll see soon. Okay, so these are two ways you can create objects depending on what you did. You can create an object within the program also, so you can write the way you use a function within a program, right? So, but if your, let's say, program is stored in a module, like a .py file, then you're going to import that module, and then with that module has, let's say, a class, so you're going to put the class name over here. Okay, so let's look at an example. So our first example of classes is a class that creates rectangles. So here it is. You have the class built-in function, and then you use rectangle. This is what you named it. Again, this is your choice. And then so there's a lot of clutter over here with different things. So don't get confused. Again, you'll be allowed to use Canvas during the exam. So I have had students in previous classes just copy paste these whole the whole thing and then modifying it for their own purpose. So don't worry too much about. You should know the overall format of how a class is written, but obviously at this stage you don't have to memorize every method that we're going to use. So let's go with it. So this is where you're initializing your class. So this self parameter, so this is that self parameter that I mentioned. So that's just so the self means rectangle. So you basically when you write rectangle, so below this class, let's say you write rectangle, and then empty with empty brackets. You basically created a class, and going back to our discussion on functions, right? We said that if you give these parameters values, then these are going to be default values. So you don't have to give these values if you want to keep the width and the height 1 meters, right? So you with this code, you can create a class, and since you did not give any parameters, you'll create a rectangle with width 1 and the height 1. And so this is what it means: self._width. This underscore is optional, right? You can avoid it if you want, but this is convention. It's more or less convention. So when you write self.width equal width, so that means that the width is going to be 1. So rectangle.width, the width of the rectangle is going to be 1, the default value, or you give it some value, it's going to take it and take that value, and then height is going to be 1. So that's how you have initialized a rectangle. And so you can use this DEF that we're using. So this is obviously for functions, right? So these are different methods that we're using. So now this is how you initialize, right? The class with 2 underscores, and then init, and then 2 underscores, and then the self parameter has to be there, and then again the parameters that go as the input to the class. So now these are mutator methods. The mutator methods are also called setters, right? Easier to remember. And these are basically where you're setting the values of the parameters, right? So through this you're telling the class that if someone types in, let's say, rectangle, so I'm just going to write R, rectangle dot set width, right? If someone types that, and then let's say it says 4, right? Then it's going to set the width, right? So it's just a setter method. That is, and the self means that it's the class's own name, right? So that is this piece of code is basically just to set the width of the rectangle, and this is again to set the height. Okay, so again, if you just type in again the rectangle over here, and then with the empty parentheses, it's gonna give it the width to be 1, and then height to be 1 also. But if let's say you want to change that, then you're gonna say r dot or rectangle dot set width or set height. So this is just to change the values if you want to. Now, if you change the values, or if let's say someone else created that object, and you want to check what the width is. So these methods are called getters. There's another name for that. It's getters. So these are setters, and these are getters. Getters means you can get what the width is, for example. So get width, right? So if you do that, it's gonna print out the width that you just set or someone else set for that rectangle, and this is again for that height, right? And notice that return. So this is gonna return what you set as the width or the height. Okay, so there can be other methods also, like the area. So area is width into height. So you're just so notice these, the self that we use everywhere. So this is why it's important in classes, the self parameter, right? So self dot width, and you multiply the width with the height. Okay, and then for the parameter, it's just the total length of the rectangle, right? So it's just 2 multiplied by, because there are 4 sides, and then you add the width and the height. So these are just calculations related to some properties of the rectangle, right? And you can also have the str method. So these are optional, but obviously you need these type of things when you write classes. So if you, for example, do this str and then your the object name that you created, right? It's going to return basically a string that is going to tell you that the width is this and the height is that. So it's that str function that we've been using. So classes are built into Python's own framework as well. Okay, so let's look at some examples of what we just discussed, and I was explaining this, but repetition is always good. So let's say that you have stored your the class. I'm assuming that I've stored this whole class in a file called rectangle.py. Okay, so that's the name of the file, and it's in the same folder. So you use import rectangle. And so this file has this class, okay? So this is again the module name that we discussed. You can use the module name dot class name, and then empty parentheses mean that it's gonna. So if you use empty parentheses, then the width would be 1 and height would be 1, right? But if you want to change that, you're going to use the set width method and the set height method. And this is again that set width method and the set height method that you're gonna, so the setters again that you're using to set the width to 4 and the height to 5, and then you can use the getters, right? Again, these are the getters, and so you can use dot get width and dot get height to get the height of the rectangle. So the output is shown over here, and so the area is going to calculate it by the class, and then the parameter is going to be calculated by the class also. So you can see that the width that we set was 4, the height is 5, area is 4 times 5, and 4 plus 5 is 9, times 2 is 18. So that's the parameter. Okay, so that's one way to use the class. Another way is, so this is just another way to do this. What we did is you can directly set the width and the height. So remember, if you go back to this, right, these are 2 parameters that are optional. So if you don't give it any parameters, like what we did over here, it's just going to take the default value, and then you need to add some steps to set the width and the height. But you can just save some code and then directly give it those values also, as it is for the functions. So over here we're just giving those values directly, and so it has created this instance. So again, this is called the object that the class has created. So you can create multiple objects and then now basically have like a data set from your class. So then if you print, so you can see that when you set the values to 4 and 5 and then print it, so this is the output that you get for the first print statement, right? So that is this is just printing out a new line. So this is 4 and 5. This is what you set. If you don't have anything, then it's just going to set it equal to 1 and 1. So these are the default values. If you just give it one option, so the first one is width, right? It's just going to change the width to 4, but height would be equal to 1. And this is what you get here. Okay. So this is just another example of classes of circles, right? So in this one, you again have the default value for radius, right? So it's just self dot underscore radius equal radius. It creates a circle with radius 1 by default, but you can change that with the set method. You can change the radius with the get method. You can check what the radius is. This is part of the worksheet. So the area is pi r squared, and this calculates the area, and this calculates the circumference. Okay. So yeah. So again, the classes are is a relatively tricky topic. So take your time and make sure you're going through the Zaya books also. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Go ahead and solve the worksheet.